Hello everyone, thank you for coming today. My name's Alison Bowyer and I'm the Executive Director of Kids in Museums, and I'll be hosting the session with my colleague Laura Bedford, who's our Head of Programmes. For those of you who aren't familiar, Kids in Museums is a UK-wide charity. We exist to support the museum sector to make museums, heritage sites, galleries, really any heritage place you could visit better for children and families. We do this through a core programme of a manifesto which sets out what makes a heritage site a great place for families to visit, an annual award which we give for the most family-friendly museum in the UK. Usually this is judged by families visiting museums, but this year we've given awards for digital activities created during lockdown. On our website, you'll find a selection of free resources, and we have a year-round training programme for museum staff working in this area. And finally, we run a programme called Takeover Day, which has a digital existence where young people take over museum social media for the day, and in usual times, a physical existence where children and people go into museums, do adults' jobs of the day to get a sense of what it's like to work in a museum. Now I'll hand over to Laura, who is going to start her presentation about what's been going on in museums since the summer and what the challenges and opportunities have been with a family audience.
Thanks, Alison. Hi, everyone. Nice to virtually meet you all. So I think, Sarah, if you're all right to come off sharing screen, and we're going to share a presentation now, or Alison is, for the magic of Zoom.
Sorry, hang on a second. Oh, I need the bit of the PowerPoint menu I can't see. Hang on.
It's always fun doing this bit.
I'm sorry about this. I know I'm doing really. There you go.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alison. So yeah, we could start with this one. That's fine. So what we thought we'd do is a bit of a roundup, as Alison said, particularly around kind of October half term. Because if anyone came to our last cuppa session, we sort of looked at the summer, and we've been trying to sort of look at, I suppose, family intentions for visiting museums and kind of challenges they might have come up against when going back into museums over the summer. So one of the things we did back in the summer was to kind of look at Tripadvisor reviews and kind of do a bit of a kind of survey of what things were coming up for families in terms of coming back to museums. And there were quite a lot of challenges which came up over the summer, but actually it's been really nice sort of looking at the reviews over October half term that a lot of those challenges seem to be resolved or weren't coming up as often, because most of the kind of feedback from family was really positive, which is great to see. I thought I'd start off with a slightly negative one, but then kind of look at more positive reviews. So this first one here is the only thing that needs improving is some sort of signage or arrows to help direct the flow of people, as there are people in all directions. So if you're nervous about COVID, this isn't ideal. Plenty of hand sanitizers around though. Also, just to note that the cafe isn't open. So there was quite a lot of kind of things around one-way systems, maybe not being flexible enough, that came up in the summer, and being really clear, and also around kind of maybe families being a little bit faster going through venues than maybe some other visitors. So we did hear about some museums kind of looking at takeover lanes, kind of areas where there was a bit more room for people to kind of take over if they found that they were a bit faster than other visitors. In terms of the kind of last comment about the cafe not being open, so again in the summer there was quite a lot of things coming up about kind of that pre-visit information being really important for families. Families are more likely than any other visitor to want to bring their own food with them, particularly if they've got smaller children. So having that sort of clear pre-visit information around whether cafes are open can really make sure that visitors, family visitors, can plan their trip accordingly if they need to bring food with them or eat elsewhere. But moving on to the kind of more positive comments. So I think something that came up in the summer was around accessibility, particularly for wheelchair users, and maybe one-way systems not being adapted properly for those visitors. But there was a really nice comment here about kind of front of house staff being really proactive. So an amazing place. We squeezed in so much as we could, but didn't think we saw it all. Particularly compliments to be paid to the chap in the kitchen who spotted my lip reading badge and removed his mask temporarily. He was really helpful. So that really kind of proactive front of house staff helping families with access needs, which is great. Alison, you're right to move on to the next slide. And then in terms of, I suppose, venues maybe being a little bit quieter, so not being able to take as many visitors. So actually, if venues can, sort of front of house staff or volunteers having a little bit more time to spend with families. So this quote here is from the British Motor Museum. Thought was really nice. So my husband and I and our 2 sons spent a fantastic few hours here today. It was our half term this week, but the half term activities at the museum are next week. I messaged ahead to ask if there was any chance we could do any of the half term activity stuff today. We weren't disappointed. Jim spotted us as soon as we walked in and made us feel so special. We got a private tour and got hands on with lots of the cars not usually open to the public. He's very knowledgeable and gets very animated, telling stories about the car's history. The boys loved being so involved, and it more than made up for the fact we won't be here for the half term activities. So that really nice kind of proactive and kind of special treatment that family got, which obviously will be of memory for kind of future as well. And then Alison, you might move on to the next one. So again, I suppose kind of looking at what families get out of going to museums, particularly at the moment, that kind of well-being aspect. So this was from the Ashmolean Museum kind of Tripadvisor review. So amazing museum. We booked a free entry time during half term, masked up, sanitized our hands and went for a visit. It was lovely, clean and quiet, felt very safe. You're free to move around, only the staircases are one way. The exhibits are amazing. The Egyptian gallery is wonderful. My kids enjoyed seeing the collections and paintings. It was so wonderful to be back in the museum, learning history from all the treasures. Our visit has really cheered me up and helped me feel more normal in these tricky times. Thank you to all the staff for keeping open. Sorry, one of the comments just popped out, so I can't read the end of the sentence. So there we go. We really got a lot out of our visit. So that really nice feedback from families obviously really enjoyed that visit and really lifted them at this time. So now moving on to, I suppose, the kind of visitor sentiment surveys, which we've been trying to sort of keep on top of since museums have reopened back in the summer, and kind of looking at visitor intention in terms of kind of continuing to visit museums at the moment with COVID restrictions in place. Obviously, a lot of museums across the country are shut at the moment due to various lockdowns, but just to move on to the next slide. Brilliant. So this is from the Visit Britain and Sentiment Tracker, and they did some surveys during October half term. Obviously, some museums were kind of getting ready to kind of shut down again at that point, or some might have been sort of closed, and they found that actually about a fifth less visitors were a fifth less likely to visit museums when restrictions are lifted, which is obviously not great news. And the BVA Clearsight report found that they looked at kind of net comfort scores about going to different venues, and actually the only things that were kind of that people felt less comfortable about visiting were places like aquariums, theme parks and indoor play centres. But the good news is that if you do have an outdoor venue, the Family Arts Campaign and Indigo research found that families were kind of less likely to be concerned with the British weather, which is great compared to other audiences. Alison, you're right to move on to the next one. And then keeping with the Family Arts Campaign and Indigo survey, I suppose this is kind of useful for the future planning, particularly if you're a ticketing venue. So they looked at, I suppose, the intention of spending money on cultural activities kind of post, once things kind of go back to normal after COVID. And they found that actually families were probably the most impacted in terms of kind of economic wise from the COVID pandemic, but not so much health-wise. But the kind of economic impact has meant that for families thinking about going back to cultural events, kind of when things do go back to normal, people felt that they would be kind of about 50% sort of down on what they'd spend kind of compared to pre-COVID levels. But moving on to some more positive kind of things. So Kids in Museums ran the Where's Wally Spooky Museum Hunt in October, and we thought it might be useful to kind of share with you some of the feedback we got from the museums that took part. There was around nearly 80 museums across the UK who took part, and so they received some mini little standees of Wally, and you might be able to see in the picture in the background of this image here, one of the standees. And so they also got some little letters so that the families would go around the museum, find the Wallies, and then they got a trail sheet from the museum staff, and then they had to work out a phrase using by collecting and finding the letters around the museum. They then got given a bookmark if they managed to complete that. And we know there's been quite a lot of concern from maybe museum staff around the kind of safety of using things like paper-based trails in terms of kind of social distancing and that kind of thing. So we thought the feedback from the museums that took part might be really useful for those that may be facing some of those barriers in their organisation. So around 91% of those that took part felt that it was really easy to run the trail with social distancing in place, which is great to hear. Also, this quote from one of the museum staff, it was very straightforward to run, enjoyable, and really helped encourage families back into the museum when we have had to remove most of our family elements due to high touch and transmission risk. So that kind of trail alternative or treasure hunt has proved something that's worked really well. Our staff really enjoyed the experience and seeing families back in the building. They are now full of enthusiasm to help us come up with other social distance activities which we can implement in our museum and gallery spaces. So that's really great that maybe the front of house staff or staff in the museum were a little bit worried about using that kind of activity in a museum, but found that actually it worked really well, and now they want to come up with new activities together. And then it also allowed them, the families, to engage and interact confidently with front of house teams at a time when face masks and COVID restrictions may have made the museum a much less friendly place. So again, the way that the trail kind of helped with those interactions when maybe families don't feel as confident and comfortable in museum spaces as they had to kind of pre-COVID. So we just thought we kind of leave with that kind of positive feedback, which hopefully is helpful. We will be sharing this presentation after today, so if you need any of the quotes and anything, we will have that. But we're going to ask if anyone's got any kind of comments or questions. I don't know if anything's come up in the chat whilst I've been talking before we go to some breakout rooms.
The only question I can see in the chat so far is about the pros and cons of doing live online versus pre-recorded videos. Now, I don't know if we're going to look at that a little bit later, but I just thought I'd let you know that question has popped up in the chat already.
Oh, I don't know. I think we weren't going to look at, I suppose, the online stuff so much today. We do, at the end of the session, we will be sharing a few resources, and that includes a resource that Kids in Museums have created, which kind of has collated all of the feedback we got from the judges from the Family Friendly Museum Award for this year, which obviously was online for lots of the categories, and we've kind of collated a sort of top tips for how to create online activities kind of based on that feedback. Alison, I don't know if you wanted to chip in on anything around kind of online pre-recorded versus live.
I probably depends a little bit on the audience. Obviously, if you're doing something live, safeguarding and online safety become much bigger concerns. Thinking about what platform you're using. If you're using something like YouTube, anyone can potentially access your stream, so how you manage that. I was talking to the National Video Games Museum earlier, and they were talking about how they'd actually, for their live streams over the summer, ended up using a bot to help them police the people interacting with their streams, so they could exclude difficult comments before they even got posted, which I thought was interesting. I think it probably also depends on what sort of interaction you want. Obviously, we saw with the Family Friendly Museum Award, we saw the Zoology Live Festival in Cambridge. That was a really interactive experience, but it kind of lent itself to that because it was experts presenting. But if it's something that doesn't lend itself much to that kind of instant interaction, then there probably are a lot of advantages to pre-recording in terms of things like safety and also obviously the ability to edit and things. But I think it probably depends on who your audience is, what platform you're going to use, and sort of how long you want whether you want to be able to reuse the content. I don't know if that's helpful.
I think that was really helpful. I think that's really great. We do have another question, but I think it might be covered in what you just mentioned there, Laura. Kate, do we have any case studies of successful early years activities in COVID times? I think
So I did attend the early years network meetings that some of you might be aware of, and there was a few presentations from a couple of museums, so the National Maritime Museum and the Museum of London, and they were so this was pre kind of the second lockdown for England, so they were doing kind of smaller groups, so obviously depending on their the capacity of their room, they really reduced down the number of sort of families they could have, and usually it was supposed kind of 1 adult to 1 child kind of ratio, and they created these kind of little islands, sort of using things like maps so that the family knew which one was theirs, and they had a little box full of resources for them to use in the session. I think they tried not to have things like singing, because I know singing's supposed to be kind of worse for kind of transmitting the disease. They kind of use, if they did have, I think some of them did use freelancers who were doing songs, but they were getting the children and the adults to kind of use instruments to kind of tap along to, rather than them singing along, which they would have done previously. But I think they gave them kind of song sheets to take home with them, so if they wanted to do the song at home, they could do that as a follow-up. So I think those sessions have worked really well, and I think the feedback, particularly from parents who were kind of new parents, was that they really kind of missed out on having those kind of group sessions and kind of meeting other new mums, and so felt quite isolated. So they felt that doing these face-to-face sessions were really important for them, and that I think the museum were thinking about putting on a few more sessions because there was the demand. There was a little bit of debate around kind of pre-booking and whether sort of how far in advance you could pre-book things, because they did find, I think some of the ones that you could pre-book a few weeks in advance found that the same people were booking like in advance, which meant that new people couldn't come along. So I think the Museum of London tended to do something where you could only book a few days in advance, and that kind of stopped that from happening so that more people could access the sessions. So I suppose that's something to think about, but hopefully that's useful.
Great. Perfect. That's it for now, but I'm sure more will pop up as we move through the rest of the session.
Brilliant. Well, if anyone's not got any kind of further questions or comments, I think we can move to our breakout room. So we thought it might be a really good opportunity for you to kind of, I suppose, have a bit of a reflection on kind of what happened during October half term, or kind of after the summer for you. So that might have been online, it might have been in person, kind of anything that you've been doing around families, and you want to share, so your successes and your challenges together in groups. Group 1, where you were you doing the feedback, or was someone else in the room?
No, I was. We were looking at ways in which some people are working. Anna from the National Gallery of Scotland was talking about how they are focusing a little bit more on new parents and carers and teachers, and sort of providing situations for them to network. I mean, Anna, I don't know where you are on the screen, but if you want to pipe up at any point and correct me, by all means do, but more empowering them to be able to do the content themselves, and to be creative and have that opportunity, and also have that opportunity to network. I mean, you touched on it earlier, but new mums this year have just completely missed the boat with NCT classes and baby sensory and all the things that come with having a baby and being on maternity. And it's such a shame, and I think it's a big gap, and I think it's wonderful that it's being filled. We also looked at, and I'll give you this and then we can talk about it, we also looked at the opportunities for guided visits and self-led visits, and how guided visits offered an excellent opportunity for museums that are small, with small spaces, but obviously massively reduces the amount of people you can have through the door, but that self-led came with other issues that organizations are trying to get around by, paper. Is it okay to have them doing self-led tours? And Emily in our group was talking about how the British Museum have piloted a self-led, and it seems to be really positive in the downloads, but that there's no evaluation in place for them to see the impact of it. That was kind of the gist of our breakout room.
Brilliant, thanks, Sarah. So I suppose we could pick up on a couple of those things in a moment, but so I think, Joanne, you were kind of in our group. I think you were making a few notes. Do you want to share? I think you're on mute at the moment.
I was going to say, I wrote some words on a piece of paper and now I'm like, oh, do they make any sense at all? Yeah, we sort of went around the group and talked about the type of work that we've all been doing with families. There's been quite a bit of work with schools, which is interesting. And coming from my perspective in Ireland, we haven't really engaged too much with schools in any on-site activities, but we're doing webinars with them, with some schools, and creating a lot more online resources, which are getting huge traction, much more than they would have normally. In terms of families, though, for example, in the History of Science Museum, where is who's speaking from there? I've lost her. Sorry. So they've done a family trail and realized that their old family trails didn't comply with the one-way system, and they were encouraging people to linger. So I suppose everybody's trying to figure out the best way of encouraging families to come in the door to still enjoy the activities that they can participate in, or their own self-guided visits, but in a way that doesn't mean they're standing around. Getting too close to the actors was another concern in the National Justice Museum. So the actors are now still in the space in this very carefully controlled one-way system, but they're behind their props or their laundry in one case, I believe, Joe, so that the visitors can't get too close. And of course, in the in Harriet's Theatre, which the name I didn't write down, so I'm sorry, there have been a lot of redundancies and none of the heritage stuff is open. So they're doing stuff online, but they're only open to the public as a theatre now, and not for any heritage stuff. So who else do we have? Yeah, Esther from the Life Science Centre talked a lot about how they've also looked at Tripadvisor for comments and feedback as well, which has been really, really helpful. They found some similarities there, that issues that had begun in the summer began to be resolved by half term. So that's
brilliant. Thanks, Joanne. And who was in group 3? Alison, were you going to feedback, or was there someone else from the group? Was Sarah?
Yeah, we were talking about how we felt like we were all in quite similar positions, because we either had only opened in a very limited way or had got one day from opening in our case and never actually opened. So we were all quite keen to hear more from people that have had the experience of opening for longer. And we were thinking about that we were all kind of at the planning stage, so we were planning what we could do. That Where's Wally Trail was really positive and gave ideas to extend that and base it on our own collections. But then we're also thinking about the flow through a one-way system and how that would work if the trail might encourage the children to go faster than the adults wanted to, and then they couldn't go back. So thinking about planning for that. And we talked a little bit about testing out one-way systems, and there was a great suggestion about engaging your volunteers as critical friends to test out systems and how they work. And I think a couple of us are in the same position where we'd normally be thinking of families first, but we're actually thinking of schools first. It's a little bit easier with some of the logistics to highlight some issues. Yeah, using our school audiences as our guinea pigs to see how things might work out. And then going forward, thinking about how we balance school visits against public visitors on site, and thinking about how that will work. And yeah, we talked a little bit about balancing these operational issues that in the past maybe weren't part of our jobs. Maybe we were being more creative, but now we're having to be very practical, first of all. And we also thought a little bit about what resources we might need and examples of where other places have used a lot of resources and thought about their space to be able to do events.
Brilliant, thanks, Sarah. And I think that idea of kind of piloting, I know the Museum of Water and Steam in London, they did a kind of family VIP visit before they opened for October half term, and invited a lot of their kind of regular families to come and pilot how it was going to work, so then they could just kind of troubleshoot anything, and it kind of made those families feel really special. So they really enjoyed that. Great idea. Okay, so I think as we've got about 10 minutes left, we thought we'd just kind of open it out as a kind of whole group discussion rather than going into the meeting rooms. I think by the time we come back again, because sometimes it takes a little bit of time. I think there were a few people that kind of had some thoughts about sort of things they were planning for the future and maybe wanted some kind of feedback on. But if anyone wants to share kind of what they've got planned for kind of Christmas and maybe into the new year, even if I know things are kind of uncertain a bit at the moment, but if anyone wants to share what they're doing, or if they've got any questions for the whole group. Obviously Sarah shared about the kind of self-guided versus guided visits. If anyone wants to talk about that a bit more. If you want to, I think we probably see everyone on screen. If you want to wave, if you want to share anything or ask anything of the group, you've got a hive mind here to kind of link into. So I think Helen did. Helen, do you want to?
I asked this question to my group, and perhaps if I could ask other people now as well. Has anybody else got any live sessions planned? I was just saying that we've got our first one at the History of Science Museum this Friday as part of the City's Light Festival. We've got a 45-minute session with volunteers doing pre-recorded activities, and then I'm acting as a live host. But yeah, really interested to hear about people's experiences, especially things that worked and things that didn't work.
Does anybody want to share what they've been doing? Anna, I'm going to pick on you. Did you do live sessions when you were doing your under fives?
Are you talking to me?
Yes, sorry, Anna. Yeah.
For under five stuff?
Was it you that was saying that you were doing online sessions?
I'm doing Zoom sessions for parents, but not for children. So all of the recorded stuff I'm doing for children, all of the Zoom sort of stuff like this is for adults. So I'm not doing any virtual stuff for kids. Partly because of what Alison was saying about safeguarding and that it's just weighing up things like that. But there will be some live sessions with schools that my colleague, the schools coordinator, will be doing next year. But we haven't really had much experience other than Zoom stuff.
Has anybody else had any experience of doing families or children stuff? Go on, Jo.
Just to say, all our formal education stuff is live. So we book in with the schools and we are there in their classroom from our respective homes with backgrounds on as well, so they can't see what we are and where we are and stuff. But we use PowerPoints, pre-recorded videos of sort of, because part of what they would do is usually go around a tour around the museum, meet a couple of our costumed actors who would tell them about the museum from the Georgian period and the Victorian period. I'm in a prison, by the way. Prison museum with courtrooms and stuff, just to put context to that. So the Georgian jailer tells them all about having to pay for everything and pulling their teeth out and stuff. So we've got short videos of that as part of a couple of our workshops. We've rearranged, sort of simplified and changed our courtroom workshops a little bit so that they can be delivered within the classroom. So they do some prep beforehand and then we sort of talk about law and that kind of thing, but we do it all. We'd like to do it from the courtroom ourselves, but obviously with us in lockdown and stuff, we're doing them from home. So all of our sessions are live ones, and that also brings up its own challenges in the fact of, like, this week I should have done 2 live sessions to the same group, but I was contacted literally the night before to say that their bubble had been closed down with immediate effect because they've got COVID cases. So you have to be prepared for that as well. And then we've also had school sort of last minute changes and stuff like that. The most interesting one, which brings up its own problems, is the university groups, because they're all remote teaching. So the tutor sets up the call, we join in the call, or the students join in the call from their places as well. So that is, that's quite interesting because they can't really do the discussion, breakout rooms and all that kind of thing, which is fine on Zoom, but trying doing that on Teams is a bit of a nightmare, and things. So yeah, it's interesting, but I'll put my email address in the chat if anyone wants to have a chat about doing online live and stuff with me. That's not a problem. I'll put my email in.
Thanks, Jo. Kathy, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I haven't done anything myself. I have literally just come off furlough. But Westminster Abbey have done quite a lot of stuff. They've done Facebook Lives, they've done Zooms, and it might be worth contacting their families, people. So they've done a lot of stuff around safeguarding and so on as well. They've actually done some presentations for GEM, but they've done some good stuff that might, and have worked through various formats until they found stuff that works as well, because they were only partially furloughed and they've been doing stuff since Easter, so they've got quite a lot of expertise there.
So Helen, I don't know if you want to put your email in the chat, or we can go through Sarah and then we can put you in touch with Westminster Abbey. They're usually quite happy to help.
Yeah.
Okay, has anyone got anything else before we kind of, I suppose, bring things to a close? Someone said about the Jewish Museum as well. So again, yeah, we can put you in touch with someone from there too. Cool. In that case, Alison, you're right to share the screen again. I'm just going to go through a few resources that might be useful for you, which Sarah will send out after the session. So you'll get these.
Hold on just a second.
Brilliant. Just to say that with our, you might be familiar with our Kids in Museums Manifesto, and we've mapped that to kind of reopening, and we keep that updated all the time. So if you are kind of reopening for the first time, or kind of working on things, then that might be worth having a look at. We're still using our hashtag Kids Back in Museums, our social media campaign. So if you are able to open and you have got families back in your museum, do share what you're doing. And we're sort of asking families and museums to use that hashtag, and we'll share what people are up to. Those are the kind of links to those 3 reports that I mentioned, if you want to go into those in a bit more detail, if that's useful. And then Alison, you're right, just to go on to the next screen. And then a few things, again, kind of thinking about, I suppose, family spend within your museum. We've just updated our flexible ticketing report. So we initially created that about a decade ago, and we've updated it, and we've looked at COVID and how that's kind of impacted on family ticketing as well. And actually how some museums have seen that because families are quite keen to go back to museums, or at least they were in the summer, then actually being able to benefit from that, yeah, actually getting more secondary spend from families. There's some information there about sort of young people's groups. We had a really brilliant blog from Leeds City Museum about their decade-long youth engagement. And also we started off a directory. So if anyone's got any youth, kind of long-term youth sort of programs they want to share and get young people to sign up to, we have got a directory. You can just fill in a form on our website. And that's that creating digital content for families resource that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. And then we've just this week been sort of looking at kind of how museums can support young people's employability skills. Obviously, kind of going into the sector for young people is not so much of an option maybe at the moment, but the way that museums can really support employability skills for young people, particularly at the moment. We've got a really great blog from National Museums Liverpool, looking at kind of how they're thinking about doing work experience online, as well as the Museum of London, and then just some information about, I suppose, kind of really short-term engagement with young people, including work experience and takeover day, all the way up to kind of longer term engagement that might last a year or more with young people, and how that can really benefit them. And that's my contact email if anyone wants to get in touch after today. So that's everything I want to share. And just to say that we've also been doing our play mentoring project with around 11 museums across the UK. So we do have an event next week. Unfortunately, that is sold out. It's sold out quite quickly, but we are going to, the museums are providing case studies for us, and we're going to be looking at kind of creating a resource for that in the new year. So that'll be launched in January. So do have a look out for that. If you're not signed up for our newsletter or kind of follow us on our Twitter or other social media, please do. And that will be coming up really soon. But there's some really good examples of how museums have used playful interactions with children and families with COVID restrictions in place. So that might be quite useful for you. So I think that's everything I wanted to say. Thank you very much, everybody. You're right to unshare, Alison, and we'll say our goodbyes. I think we've got 2 minutes, so in good time. And I think, Sarah, do you want to say anything before?
I just wanted to say thanks so much for joining us, everyone. And I have to say that I've never met a sector that is so more open to sharing expertise, guidance, knowledge than this sector. And I think it's wonderful, especially in the current times, that we all stick together and support each other through this, because there's no point reinventing the wheel. If someone's invented it and it works really well, then sharing that to a group of other people and letting them know how you've used it and the pitfalls that you avoided or maybe even fell into, it's super helpful. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Kids in Museums, for working on this together with us. We're so thrilled to be able to bring this content to you all for free at this time in the current conditions. And that's it, I think. Just thanks very much for joining us, and thank you, Kids in Museums.
Thanks, everyone. Great to meet you all.